That worked. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. Cedar Stanistreet is going to tell us all about his trip to Costa Rica. And I'm excited to live vicariously through you.
All right. It'll be good for me to remember this and try to recount some good experiences. Well, I will start screen share. I'm going to show basically a slideshow and go through each photo and just, talk about the birds and talk about habitats and things like that. So share screen. Okay. Here, you all see this?
Yes.
Cool. I'm going to move this window so I can actually see it. This is, so I went to Costa Rica in January, the first 2 weeks of January this year, and beautiful time to get away from this nasty winter that we were having. Anyway, I traveled, this was a solo trip all by myself, just traveling by public transit with a backpack. So it was on the cheap, so to speak, and I had somewhat limited options on where to go since I was just using buses and things, which in Costa Rica and anywhere in Latin America, there are fantastic public transit systems compared to North America. You can get surprising numbers of places by bus, but you still have to do a little more work and it takes more time. So I wanted to maximize my 2 weeks. So I picked like 3 main areas to be in during that time. And each area is like in a different habitat zone. So the first, well, I guess it was more like 4. The first one where you fly into in the San Jose airport is what they call the Central Valley. It's a area but in the middle of the country between a few like a little mountain range to the south, and there's the volcanics range to the north. And it's cut off from the coastal lowlands on either side by these little mountain ranges. So it's got its own little sort of climate, and there's some species that are endemic to Costa Rica and to just the Central Valley area. So I had a couple targets for this trip, and it was also for this area. And the first day I was there, so I was just trying to see everything there was. And this picture is the beginning of I got in the evening, stayed the night in a hostel not too far from the airport, and then I got a taxi out to this area, which is just outside the city Alajuela. It's on a coffee farm, which is very common. There are a lot of coffee farms in the Central Valley as you start to go up the hills, into the hills away from the city. And they're kind of fantastic places to bird. There are lots of cool birds, and because it's they're like you can walk on a road and the bushes are sometimes spaced apart and the trees aren't huge, that it's easier to see the birds than in like the rainforest. So here I got dropped off here and walked down for maybe a couple miles down this dirt track through these coffee farms, specifically seeking out a couple species of ground sparrow, the Cabanis ground sparrow, which is the endemic to that area. Eventually did find them. Unfortunately, I never got any photos of either of the ground sparrows because they are sneaky and hop in and out of view in seconds. So, but I got some good views. In the meantime, let's see. Oh, come on. First bird of the morning. And you probably know what this is. A familiar bird, maybe one from up here. I'm not actually sure. I had to look into where they specifically migrate, but this is broad-winged hawk. And it was looking at me as I got out of the car that morning, first thing. So I took its photo. And this lovely little species is a rufous-naped wren, and they are not uncommon, but they're fun and they're a little bit noisy, a little bit like a Carolina wren or a Bewick's wren in their behavior. They love these kind of thorny, tangly bushes that are along roadsides in the Central Valley. And this is also pretty much right off the bat. I found one of these staring at me from a tree, maybe 10 feet in front of me, eye level. It was in the shadows. It was a little bit tricky to get a picture, but it sat there and posed for a while, so I got a chance. And this is a lessons motmot. And if any of you have been in the sort of Latin America, motmot, there's a few species of motmot, and they're all very brightly colored and have these tail rackets, which are super cool. I just love the shape of the motmots, and they the way they behave, they just sit there in the tree super silently. So they're not very small, and they don't really blend in, but you can miss them pretty easily because they don't move and they don't make any noise. They just sit there looking at you. And I should mention that I'm happy to take questions. So if you have any comments or questions along the way, unmute and type in. I can't actually see people when I'm sharing my screen, so let me know. This is my life. Both of these first couple birds were my lifers, because they're common in Costa Rica, but they're not as common in other places where I've been, so, or not found. There are different species of motmots in Mexico, which I've seen, but Lessons motmot is Costa Rica.
Is Lessons an endemic?
It's not endemic to Costa Rica. No, I mean it's Central America in general, but they're not up into Mexico, where I've seen a couple other species of motmot. This is a roadside hawk, very common in the neotropics. Probably the most common raptor anywhere down, like in Mexico or Central America. You see these. It is like its name says, roadside hawk. It's the common thing you see perched near a roadside or at the edge of a field on it, which is what this is, on this dead snag. They're small. They're buteo, but they're smaller than broadwings. This is not a fantastic picture, but if you look in the middle of the screen, right in front of the trunk of this big bush, is this little yellow thing with a rufous head. This is the rufous cap warbler, which are quite common in the semi-arid open country, kind of like the coffee farms are. And these are also widespread across Central America and Mexico. And these warblers, they're kind of float about. They're a little bit similar to maybe like a yellow throat in some of their habits and habitats, but drier. Oh, back to the motmot. I just couldn't get enough of this guy. And my first lifer hummingbird of the trip was this blue, what was this? A blue vented hummingbird. These are also not uncommon in the Central Valley, but I didn't see them anywhere else on my trip. So that's like their specific habitat zone that they live in, is that sort of mid-elevation. It's not dry like desert, but it's also not wet. It's not really like a rainforest. It's sort of a mid, as far as dryness. It's actually not dissimilar to like Eastern North America a lot of the time, as far as it felt like a lot of deciduous trees. Beautiful weather when I was there. This is actually one of the most common hawks that I saw in Costa Rica, which is very surprising given how rare they are other places where they live, like in the southern US or even in Mexico. I haven't seen these. This is a short-tailed hawk, which was probably the most frequent soaring raptor I saw a few times. I didn't actually see that very many raptors in general, because a lot of the places, or once I got up into the mountains, it was cloudy and fogged in the afternoons pretty much every day. So, well, not so good for the soaring raptors. But in the Central Valley, there were these hawks, and did see a few more of them over the course of the trip. Light morph short-tailed hawk. This is just another stunning view from another coffee farm where I was. You can see the coffee berries over there on the right side of the stream. That's a close-up of what the coffee beans look like when they're growing in these red berries. This is another shot of the coffee farm. This is the coffee bushes are the low bushes, and there's these taller trees interspersed around them, like these large-leaved banana-like trees. I'm actually not entirely sure what all these trees are, but there's definitely a bunch of bananas, and this habitat is fairly cultivated and cut over compared to what it might have been originally, but what it has become is still good for birds. There's a lot of bird life and pretty good diversity in the coffee farms, including these. This is a Montezuma oropendula, and it looks totally evil in this photo, but those white dots aren't actually its eyes, despite what this might look like. They're in the cheek, sort of below the eye. But I just love this photo because it looks like it's glaring at you. Now you can see where the actual eye is. And they nest, oropendulas make these pendulous nests in colonies. There'd be a whole bunch of them in one tree. So this tree, I found this nesting colony of these guys, and all of these nests they're like a little bit like a Baltimore Oriole nest, but they're huge. Like each of these ones that you see in the middle here are like a foot long. These are large birds, like almost crow-sized. And they make these nests where they can somehow get in there. All right, I'm gonna back up, sorry. All right, so this concludes the Central Valley portion of the trip. I was there for 2 mornings, got some nice coffee farm birding in, and explored the city of Alajuela, which is a lovely little city. The airport is between San Jose and Alajuela. It's actually nearer to Alajuela, which is a little sort of friendlier city, easy to get around, lots of great things to do as a visitor. San Jose, I didn't spend much time there except to transfer from one bus to another bus a couple times, and it's a very big metropolitan and a little more gritty, you might say. Not a place where I would really enjoy spending time. But from there, I took the bus from San Jose south into the Talamanca Mountains, which are the chain of mountains that runs sort of a spine in the center of the country heading towards Panama. So it's sort of in a southeasterly direction. And they're some of the highest peaks in Costa Rica are in the Talamancas. So there's this sort of a ridge that goes over there, and the Pan American Highway, Route 2, I believe, I forget what it's called, but they call it the Pan American Carretera Panamerica, and it allows you to access the tops of these mountains, and there's some great birding spots, and there's some national parks up there. So I picked a spot. It looked like good cloud forest habitats near some other more well-known birding lodges, but it was a little hostel that I found, sort of a small like eco lodge hostel, and not too expensive. So I got the bus after much deliberating and trying to figure out how to communicate with the bus driver in Spanish, which was not an easy task because I have very limited Spanish, but I was able to get him to understand where I wanted to be dropped off up along the road. It's just basically a random spot on the highway. So got myself there and spent the next 4 nights in this little place called Iac Ami, which was a wonderful, I just completely fell in love with it. It's in the habitat up there where this was what you would consider cloud forest. It's maybe 2,500 to 3,000 meters elevation. I think where the lodge was about 28. So that's 8,000 feet maybe. So it's pretty high, and the way the mountains are, the ocean builds up like moisture over the day from the Pacific, and it moves east, and then it crosses these mountains, and the clouds sit there. And this happened it did happen every day that I was there, and it creates, so it's like it was sunny every morning, and then about 11 or noon, the clouds started to roll in, and by like 1 or 2, it was completely fogged in, and it would be that way the rest of the day. And somehow overnight it would clear. But every day you'd get this cloud. So it didn't really rain, but it would be like super wet. The air was just dripping. And the cloud, so it creates this forest where the trees are just laden with mosses and epiphytes and things. So this is my little room at Yak Ami. I got a little private room for myself for the 4 days, and very basic and rustic, but it was a wonderful little place to stay. And they had great food. Here's the outside of this place, and this one guy, Beatrice, lives here, and it's his place, and he's sort of created this little haven for travelers. There may be, in the main house, there may be 5 little private rooms, and then like a bunk room that can probably fit maybe a dozen people. So, and here's the common area. This is where we hung out in the evening and where the meals were. And the people they are also birders. So there's all this bird art. They had some field guides. It was a great place. This is your typical view from the lodge in the afternoon. This is what it looked like, looking out over the clouds. And then in the morning, this is basically that same view. And you could see north. This is basically a northward view over the Central Valley, where I had just come from, looking up towards the volcanic range. And I don't remember the names of these particular mountains, but these are both these mountains you can see up there are volcanoes. Another version of the same view. And it would look like this, and then by midday, clouds would be back in. So I went on a hike. One day I was there. I looked at the trail map. This is, of course, all in Spanish, but you can see where it says Costa Rica over on the left is where the lodge was. And I hiked this whole loop around the outside, the blue trail of the furthest green trail called Nai, and the red trail back. And the trail leads you down downslope into the cloud forest, through a couple like ravines where there's some streams, and then down into some lower, like really wet area, and then back up. And it's about 7 kilometers total. So it was a pretty good day hike. And it was along this hike midway, and I was alone when I was doing this. I found my first resplendent quetzal, which is of course the national bird of Costa Rica, and a fantastic bird. Just no wonder they're so famous. But to come across this quetzal, male quetzal, sitting all by itself in the middle of the forest. And this is what the forest looked like. Let me get to the picture of the quetzal. You're hiking through, and it's just these little trails, and it's not a huge trail, so you're kind of climbing under these hanging epiphytes and around vines. You can see all of these. The plants are amazing. And there we go. I couldn't carry the big camera on this hike because it was walking, but through my binoculars with the cell phone, got this picture of the back of a magnificent bird, and doesn't do it justice, but it was just sitting there not too far away, and the tail was blowing in the breeze, and the tail on this particular bird is like 2 feet long. And then the female came in, and they both flew off. And further down, towards the bottom of the sort of ravine that I hiked down into, was this stream that I got in these instructions in Spanish to hike up this stream. You can it's hard to find the trail, but it kind of goes up the stream and it goes to a waterfall. So I'm like, is this the right stream? And I went up the stream and around the bend, and I did succeed in finding this magnificent waterfall, which was, I estimate, maybe 20 feet tall, the end of this little canyon. And the sound, it's not a ton of water, but because it's so high, it's tumbling and it's echoing off the walls of this moss covered little canyon. very cool. Just some more pictures of plants, all the mosses, and this is again right back at the lodge, little gardens they have, and and back to food. I will show a couple of pictures of food because I love taking pictures of the food in Costa Rica is fantastic. It's often what they call comida típica, which is basically the traditional food, or it means like typical food, is this Costa Rican. It's usually includes rice and beans and lots of vegetables of various types and some meat thing. And this is with fish, because I do eat fish, and they have their own in the mountains in Latin America. It's not just Costa Rica, but I've discovered it's pretty common for people to farm trout in the mountain. Something about the climate, I guess. So they have these little like cold water ponds that they have trout in, and they can then catch, and basically it's very fresh and super delicious. And this place had one little, it's like local fresh fish that's fried up, and there's salads and a wonderful bean soup. So this was your typical Costa Rican dinner. My one poor picture of a spotted wood quail. These are super skulky, hard to find quail, forest quail. The only one of, there are quite a few species of these types of birds down there. And this is the only one I succeeded in finding, but it was first thing in the morning and it was not bright enough out yet to really try to take a picture. This is handheld at like a half-second shutter speed or something ridiculous. There's a sooty-capped chlorosphingus, which is just the cutest little bird. These are very common, easily the most common species in the cloud forest area up in the mountains. They have these little bands that rove around, usually about 4 to 8 individuals, and they'll be with any mixed flock. There'll be a bunch of these, and they were also just around all the time around the lodge. So I got some good photo opportunities there. They call them bush tanagers or chlorosphingus, but they're not particularly closely related to the actual tanagers, I don't think. They're always low in the understory kind of birds.
How big are they, Cedar?
They are tanager sized.
Okay.
But like the proportions are, as you can see, a little different, and they kind of behave more like chickadees.
It looks like a chickadee to me. That's why.
Yeah, they're like bigger than chickadees, but they definitely, like the whole flocking behavior is kind of like chickadees, and they're kind of noisy like chickadees. And the forests, the cloud forests, birding in the cloud forest can be really quiet for long periods of time, and then you'll find a mixed flock will come through. And it's true like a lot of places in the tropics, but it seems to be especially true in the mountains in the tropics. You get these mixed flocks, and they're always traveling together and pretty quickly. So they'll be around you for like 5 minutes. You'll get to try to pick through and find as many species as you can, and then they'll be gone. And you don't know where they came from or where they're going. But the bush tanagers in that area were a core component of every mixed flock I encountered. And the flock will also include usually a couple like tanager species and a couple warblers and usually some wood creepers. Maybe wren. Here's a rufous-collared sparrow. These are common south of the US in the Americas, and they have a lovely song, but I just never, they're kind of like their equivalent of our song sparrows as far as how common and ubiquitous they are, but I think they're cooler, and they certainly sound prettier. Slaty flower piercer. This is a female. I have a picture of the male in a second, but these little birds are fairly tiny. I would say gnatcatcher size, and they feed like hummingbird. They will drink out of flowers the way hummingbirds do, and they will actually come to hummingbird feeders sometimes if they can get into them to drink the nectar. They have these little hooked bills, which this picture is showing pretty well, which they use to insert into the flowers to get at the nectar, hence the name flower piercer. There are a few species of these down in the tropics, but this is the only one in that area of Costa Rica. Here is another very odd bird. These are black and yellow silky flycatcher is what this is. This is the female. And they are, I'm not actually sure what they're really related to. Silky fly, there's a few species of silky flycatcher, which are the only species in North America is the one that's Southwest they call phainopepla, is a silky flycatcher. But the black and yellow silky flycatcher is unlike all the rest of them. It's kind of, I have a hard time believing it's the same, why it's even in the same group. Its proportions are completely different. It's like this chunky little round thing. Most of the rest of them, including the phainopepla, are rather sleek, narrow, long-looking birds with a little crest. But these are probably grosbeak sized, chunky. This one was sitting very patiently, and I got some beautiful photos. Here's the male. And they call it black and yellow silky flycatcher. They didn't do any fly catching from what I could see. They like to eat berries and things. They were always in the bushes. So that's some more research I need to do whenever I have some time to kill. Is what's going on with that species? Why are they called silky flycatchers? What is their deal? And the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds down in the tropics are amazing, and I tried to find as many as I could in the habitats that I was. So in the mountain habitat in the cloud forests, there were maybe half a dozen species of hummingbird. This is a female volcano hummingbird, which is probably the most common, at least in that particular elevation range, in that sort of 2,800 meters and higher. They are these are about the same size as ruby throats. I did find a male. I have a picture of a male later, which they have a sort of blackish purple throat. Oh, here's the male flower piercer, male slaty flower piercer, which is similar, just more slaty and bluish. Another lovely female volcano hummingbird. Well, there's the backside of a fiery throated hummingbird, which were another fairly common species. They were the other of the two most common species at Yakami, at least. And they are, there's later it's a picture of the front, which shows why they're called fiery throated, but throat aside, the whole bird is super iridescent, as you can see here, and they're just amazing. Some more food, the next food picture, different version of the same type of thing. Some lovely local trout, and the juices down there are amazing. It's fresh, it's like lemonade. They call it lemonade, but it's not tart. I don't know what citrus it's made from, but it's more like an orange juice as far as flavor goes. Back to birds. This is black-billed nightingale thrush, which became one of my favorite birds of the entire trip. Specifically this individual, because these birds are not rare, but they're most places they're like forest birds. They have a little bit like veeries mostly, except at Yakami there was like one or two individuals that would be hopping around on the lawn right outside the house like a robin would. And I got some pretty close up great pictures. They didn't seem too concerned about us walking around. There it is again. They're about the same size as Veeries, which Veeries might even be a nightingale thrush taxonomically. Another hummingbird is lesser violet ear, common down there. And this funny little bird. These were common, but very hard to actually get a view of because they skulked around in bushes. A little bit like towhees. This is a yellow-thighed finch, which you can see a tiny bit in this picture. Why? And one of my only pictures of a wood creeper or that family. This is actually a ruddy tree runner is the name of this particular species. And these were not rare, often found in some of the mixed species flocks, but tricky to get a good view of because they often creep around the backsides of trees and or in the shadows. These wood creepers are generally a lot bigger than our tree creeper. There are one tree creeper species in North America, the brown creeper. This particular one is one of the smaller ones, probably still bigger than brown creepers, but let's see, 5 inches tall maybe. But there were a bunch of bigger species that were like even close to being like at least hairy woodpecker sized. Here's a Talamanca hummingbird, which is an endemic to that area of Costa Rica and a tiny bit into Panama, where the Talamanca Mountains go that further south. And this hummingbird they're large. They used to be called the magnificent hummingbird, which was then split into 2 species, the Rivalese hummingbird, which is the ones in Mexico and the southern US, and then the Talamanca hummingbird, endemic to that part of Costa Rica. There's a first warbler photo. This is a collared redstart, which were one of the more common warblers to encounter. There weren't a lot of warblers down there. There were most of the warblers down there were wintering species from North America, which was kind of fun to see. I would say the most common warblers to encounter in the mixed flocks in this area of the cloud forest was Wilson's warblers, black-throated greens, and these collared redstarts. And there were a couple other more rare southern warblers that don't come north, which I didn't ever get photos of, but it was fun to see the warblers are in, like, you don't think of Wilson's and black-throated green as necessarily being in the same habitat. And they're not in the North America, but down there in the mountains, you find Wilson's and black-throated green. And then in other areas of the mountains, there were black-throated green and golden-winged. And that's 2 species that don't, up here, you don't ever find them in the same breeding habitat, but down there, habitats were like completely different. So in the mountains, black-throated green and golden-winged were often found together. My next encounter with the quetzal, this is a female resplendent quetzal without the big tail. And this one was pretty good views, not far away, but it was hard to take pictures because it was quite foggy. And if there are any insect lovers out there, there were some fantastic butterflies, most of which I didn't get pictures of, but there were a couple or I guess these are both moths, these two pictures. There are, and then this one. This was right inside the door in the building. This moth is 4 inches long. It's relatively huge. It's like at least it's as big as a monarch butterfly. And it just sat there for quite a while, a couple hours maybe. My last morning, looking at the volcano. Right, so from here, actually there's a picture. This is my hosts. This is the 2 people who run this place. They were super friendly, and I would go back there for sure if I ever get down to that area again. All right, on to the next spot. Just down the road from Yakami, maybe 20 kilometers further south along the Pan American Highway, there's another spot that I stayed one night, so I would have, it's a little basically roadside restaurant, and they have a couple cabins, and it's sort of situated where I could then get a taxi the next morning to drop me off up at this road they call the Camino Los Torres. It's a road that goes to the towers, and the towers being just a bunch of radio towers, and they're at the top of this sort of mountain. And the dirt road, you can walk the dirt road up there through for a few miles up to these towers, and it goes very quickly into what they call paramo habitat, which is higher, it's above tree line essentially, so that there aren't any more trees, full-size trees. It's all these shrubs, bushes, maybe up to about 10 feet tall, much drier. It's quite the contrast to the cloud forest, and it happens pretty suddenly. And there are a few species that are only found up there that I wanted to make sure I got. So stayed here at Ristorante La Georgina, had a nice meal, fried bananas, which were another thing you found in Costa Rica, quite a few places. Amazing food. Oh, there's a humming, fiery-throated, looking at you, seeing its fiery throat. And this Ristorante La Georgina, had a whole bunch of hummingbird feeders, so it was a fantastic place to watch all the common species of hummingbird. Lesser violet ear. And there's the male volcano hummingbird. My little hike down into the cloud forest from there. And here, so this is the next morning up in the Paramo, looking, I don't remember which direction, but I basically had a 360-degree view, and it all looked like this. You're kind of on the top of the mountain ridge. This is about 32 to 3,300 meters elevation. Those are clouds you're looking down at in the valley. So I was in search of the peg-billed finch, which I actually found a few of. And the sun, it was pretty cold in the nights. Like, I didn't have a thermometer, but I would say all of my nights in the mountains it probably got down to the 40s Fahrenheit, maybe even low 40s a couple nights. But the sun, when the sun was out, was, especially up here, this is like over 10,000 feet elevation. So it was super strong, and it warmed up fast. The road, and there is my first peg-billed finch. This is a pretty rare endemic species to that area. They're only found in this particular habitat on these high mountain ridges in, I believe, just Costa Rica, maybe into Panama, in the northern part of the country where the Talamancas go. But they are, I think, related to flower piercers, but they're a weird little bird with this giant bill, which you can see here, hence the name. Oh, and there's a flower piercer. Volcano hummingbird. And the other bird that is endemic to the mountains that I was specifically targeting by walking up in the panorama. This is a volcano junco. And they behave basically the same as our dark-eyed juncos or the Mexican yellow-eyed juncos, but they're only found in a couple areas in Costa Rica, and they're evil. As you can see, the bird looks like it's got this yellow eye staring at you. Sooty thrush, one of the more, they're pretty common. They're up in the mountains. High elevation robin, basically. They're the same. They're a Curtis thrush, about the same size as our American robins. All right, and here's the next. After when I was waiting for the bus to get from there to my next destination. That concluded my week up in the high elevation. Had a wonderful time. That area, both the Paramo and especially the cloud forest, is probably my favorite habitat of the whole trip, or really anywhere in the neotropics. Just a wonderful place. From there, I went down to found this little place to stay on Airbnb in the foothills outside of the city of San Isidro del General. And it's this sort of mid-elevation rainforest, a lot of second growth. It was pretty farmed and cut over, but it's mid-elevation and wetter than the Central Valley. There it is. That's where I stayed. That is this quirky little off-the-grid cat house with a couple guest rooms run by this kind of crazy lady from Montreal who's set up shop down there, and she runs this place called Soul Sanctuary. It was a fun place to stay, quite the experience. There's no power, no electricity, no running water. There's a lovely creek down there where we got water. There's my little room. Tanagers. This is, I had 3 days at this place, and it was luckily a fantastic spot right there at the house to bird, because there wasn't a lot of good birding near by foot, because there was a lot of cow farming in the general area. But this place, she's created a little sort of oasis, and there's some great habitat directly outside the house. So we got a lot of tanager flocks every day. This species, probably easily half a dozen species of these colorful tropical tanagers. This golden hooded tanager being one of the more omnipresent ones. There's a silvery throated tanager. And these tanagers, these Tangata tanagers, as opposed to our North American tanagers that we have are Piranga tanagers in a slightly different family. They're not that closely related, but these Tangata tanagers are they're all what should I say? None of them are sexually dimorphic. So the males and females all look the same. And they're all supremely colorful. Oh, some more good insect watching. That is a ochre-bellied flycatcher, which was not an easy ID, as you might. It's a little empid-like bird. It looks, the flycatchers down there are probably the hardest family to identify in general. There are quite a few species of small flycatcher in pretty much any of the areas. And they're all basically the same as like all of our Impidinax flycatchers and stuff, cryptically colored. And maybe they'll call and then it makes it easier, but if they're silent, which they are most of the time because it's not breeding season right in the middle of winter, then good luck. Okay, here's a white ruffed manakin. This was one of the cooler finds. This was not a common bird. I only saw it this one time. Came through in a mixed species flock the one day. Manakins are small. It's a family of birds down in the neotropics, and they're smaller than tanagers, almost more like kinglets. They have these little, they have like almost no tail, short-tailed, big-headed. There's a tropical gnatcatcher. Wow, bay-headed tanager. These were locally common at that specific spot. I have seen these before in Ecuador, and they're not as common down there, but for whatever reason, right here at outside of San Isidro, bay-headed tanagers were one of the more common members of the mixed flocks, and I just couldn't get enough of taking pictures. They looked like a palette of different colors, that coppery red and the blue, and in the back they have yellow and green. Here's walking down to get some dinner at the local restaurant one evening as the sun was setting. Couple of amazing sunsets. This is little town of Chiñirol. I had heard these parrots flying around a few times while I was there, and got some distant views of them flying, but finally one morning a little small group of them landed in the tree right outside the house. So got some great views and some pictures. All three of these ones are sulfur-winged parakeets, which are not, I forget if they're endemic to Costa Rica or if just to that area of Central America, but they're not widespread. They only have a very limited range. They didn't seem particularly rare in this particular area, but I know that here was where you needed to see them because you really can't find them anywhere else. They're a small parakeet. And then there's a couple of these in the flock. These are a larger parakeet called crimson fronted. Fronts being the forehead. There are a lot of parrots named this, something fronted this or something fronted that. The front always refers to basically forehead. This was a very cool thing to see one day up at the stream that's right outside where we got water. This is a fasciated tiger heron, which they're big. Think great blue heron size. Slightly different, maybe more like an American bittern as far as proportions, but definitely as tall as a great blue. There's a lineated woodpecker. Woodpeckers aren't as ubiquitous in the tropics as they are in the temperate areas like here. So I didn't see huge numbers of them. Did get a few cool species, and this was lineated or fairly widespread, but this was probably my only encounter with the species on this trip. And they're not as large as our pileated. They're probably flicker sized. Yeah. There's a scenery shot from this, one of the places I went one afternoon. I got a bus up to this place called Cloud Bridge Nature Preserve, and it was just it's a wonderful hike. I didn't find huge numbers of birds because it was afternoon by the time I was able to get a bus up there, but it's a large nature preserve with lots of trails and through various elevations of habitats. So wonderful place. Having some coffee at the local cafe after my hike. And this was the last picture I got from this area before I then took a bus down to the coast the next day. And I spent the last 3 days of my trip in a little beach town called Ubita on the Pacific coast. So that's everything. Yeah. Getting down to the coast from here was a little bit of an adventure. Involved basically spending an entire day waiting around the city of San Isidro for one bus for trying to get to a different bus, and finally got down to the coast. It was nighttime, it was after dark, got my dinner. Here's the next picture of wonderful Costa Rican food with this is quinoa and beans and fried bananas. There's mango in there, avocado. It was just fantastic. And in the tropics, it's, closer you get to the equator, the days are pretty much the same length year round, and it pretty much gets light around 6 a.m. and dark around 6 p.m. Oh. Here's the last place I stayed. A very cool hostel in Ubita. And the owner, who I did not unfortunately get to meet because he was away on a birding trip. He's a birder, and I had been told by another friend of mine who had stayed there that gotta stay there because the owner's a birder and stuff. So I was excited to be there. And unfortunately, the owner was off on a birding trip, but next time. But they did have some great birding right from the gardens here. This is the little hangout area. There's the kitchen. And there was this canal that ran right along between sort of the yard of the hostel and the next house over. And there were some water birds that just hung out and walked around, including this purple gallinule. And these gray-cowled wood rails, which are, rails you think of as a hard to find, hard to see, skulky in the marsh. These rails were walking around the mowed yard like robins would, and in the canal. I got some great photo ops every day with them. This is the big bird sequence. Here's a gray-headed chachalaca, which, if you've ever been to the South American Southwest, we have our plain chachalacas, or in Mexico, there's the West Mexican chachalaca. Here's the Costa Rican version of those little small arboreal turkey-like birds. Gray-headed chachalaca. And speaking of arboreal birds, didn't you know that purple gallinules like to hang out in banana trees? I never would have thought. So this was kind of funny to see this bird appear. And there I found one of my targets there. This was still right at that canal, right at the hostel. This is a bare-throated tiger heron, similar to the other species that we saw a minute ago, but it has that yellow facial skin. That is a scarlet-rumped tanager. very common lowland tanager. Couple northern jacanas. This white and brown one is a juvenile. The adults are, here's a good picture of the adult. And the jacanas like to walk around on lily pads or other floating vegetation. So here, this was also one of my favorite birds of the whole trip, something I specifically was hoping to see and eventually did find and got some great pictures, just this one, the American pygmy kingfisher. And does anyone have a guess on how big this bird is? It's
6 inches head to tail.
I would say at most, absolute most.
They're little guys.
They're tiny. Yeah.
That's so
maybe
cool.
maybe closer to 4 inches, not including the bill. It's this tiny little funny little kingfisher, and the bill just looks ridiculous. So it sat there and got a couple good pictures before it flew off. And unfortunately, I had my good camera at the hostel, but I wasn't able to take it on any of my walks down, or most of my walks down in that area, because there was a lot of the good birding was sort of around, sort of what was the village. You're on these dirt roads which have residential houses, and I didn't really want to be, having too many passersby giving me questions and asking about this giant camera. So I wanted to be a little more incognito. So I never brought the camera to the beach or any of the other close by birding walks. But I did have some great birding around town, right around Ubita. There's just fantastic. You walk the back roads just around town, and there are birds everywhere. The lowland tropics are just amazing, the diversity. Here is a cell phone picture, because that's all I had, of near the beach. I was walking along, and this in the middle, if you can see, it's a common black hawk sitting in a tree. This was literally 10 feet off the ground, and the trail goes right under this bird. So I gave it a little bit of a berth. I walked off a little bit around it, and it looked at me. I looked at it, took a couple of pictures, and I walked on, and there it flew. But it was some of the closest I've ever been to a buteo perched like that, just sitting there. Unfortunately, my ancient cell phone takes horrible pictures, but that's all I had. And here's the beach. This is the beach along Ubita. It's a national park, the Parque Nacional Manuel Antonio, and two national parks, I guess, and then the Parque Nacional Marino Ballena. And so there's no houses or development on the beach, which is totally amazing and rare in a lot of parts of the world. So it was great to be able to walk the beach and just have the water on one side and the jungle on the other side. And this is where you found scarlet macaws, they are not rare in this area of Costa Rica, on this section of the Pacific coast. And you would see them flying along about at treetop level in that jungle that's right next to the beach. And the jungle there is mostly mangrove and coconut palms, and it's very tall.
Cedar, where is this?
This is it's the Pacific coast, about midway along the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. So if you're going from, it's sort of, the coast runs northwest to southeast as you head towards Panama. And this is about halfway along that stretch.
Ooh. So how far is it from the Osa Peninsula?
This is north of the Osa Peninsula. I didn't get down to the Osa because I would have needed a whole extra week to do that by public transit, to get down there and spend quality time. But yeah, this is north. This is sort of the first section of the coast that is wet.
Mhm.
Maybe an hour, if you go about an hour north from here along the coast, you start getting into the dry scrub coastal area, which I also didn't spend time in, but this is the beginning of the wet zone, which the Osa is all that wet coastal lowland forest.
It's fabulous. Go again and go to the Osa.
Oh, it's high on my list for sure. I know some people who have been there. I've got a whole list of places where I want to, like, possible lodges to stay in the Osa. Yeah, Costa Rica is just a wonderful country, and like traveling by bus like I wanted to not waste too many days traveling. I spent like a couple of entirely on buses. So in order to not do all of that, I
Mhm.
spent 4 days in one, just not moving, absorbing everything. Oh, there's a sand lizard. I never looked up what that was. I thought this was fun. Just non-bird. This is presumably an old anchor or something from a ship, but this giant hunk of metal is as tall as I am. It's massive, just up there on the sand.
Oh.
Coconuts, and you can see that down here on the coast we are in the sunshine, but if you go up into the mountains, you'd be in the clouds every afternoon. There's the only photo I got of a scarlet macaw, not just with a cell phone trying as it flew over, but luckily they are huge birds and the silhouette is unmistakable. They are, I believe, the biggest parrot species in the world. Either the biggest or the second biggest. The national park, I was very great to see that the national park had these wonderful interpretive signs if you went into the trails. And one side of the sign was Spanish and the other side of the sign was English. So this is the English side. The park is called, what this is talking about, if you can read this, is the whale tail. The reason the park is called Marino Ballena, meaning basically marine whale national park, is because the beach has this peninsula, which is sometimes covered by water, but sometimes more exposed. It's like this, and it's shaped like a whale's tail. And like you're saying, it's these ocean currents are converging at this point from different directions and creating this oddly shaped sandbar way out into the ocean. Here is the interior of that coastal jungle, which is all along the beach. And it's this coconut palm mangrove forest with these big leafed understory plants. The ground is littered with big dead leaves and coconuts. Not the easiest place to see birds. You can hear a lot of things. But then there are these ants. I ran across this a couple times, and this was one of the most amazing experiences. This is leafcutter ants. They would be just down the trail, and this was a spot where 3 different trails or rivers, I should say, of leafcutter ants came together. And you can see all these little green specks are the leaves that the ants are carrying, and they're moving down the trail continuously. And this went on for like all as far as I could see around the bend. And so I didn't step on them. You walk down the trail, and it was like maybe half a kilometer of this before it went into the forest and disappeared. This, let me see if I can play this, if this works. Oh, yes. Well, there you go. Very fun. Now I can only imagine how many ants, because I would just sit in the same spot for forever, and it would just be continuous flow of ants. and the mammals. There were the coastal jungle is quite, there are a lot of mammals too, which was really fun to see. 2 species of monkey. These are the white-faced capuchin monkeys, which were the more common. I ran across a couple troops of these in that forest. And in the same area, there was a troop of howler monkeys that I didn't get any great photos of, but they're way up at the tops of these. They hang out at the tops of these big trees, and they, at night, true to their name, there was one night where they kept me up like half the night, and the other people in the hostel, like, we were all like, oh my gosh, the howler monkeys. Couldn't get any sleep that night because they're not even that close. They're like half a mile away at the beach, but they are impressively loud creatures. And these are also terrible cell phone pictures. These are agouti, which are common species of mammal in the tropics. They are a large rodent, and they're kind of funny looking things. They walk around. They're like long-legged, large, rabbit size maybe, but unlike anything we have up here in the north. All right, that concludes my trip to the coast. And like I said, unfortunately, I don't have any more pictures of the birds from the lowlands because I wasn't able to carry the camera most of the time, but a wonderful spot. And the town of Ubita was such a fun place to hang out. There were a lot of surfers and young people and some good local, like Costa Rican local hole-in-the-wall restaurant places, and a lot of, the hostel where I was staying, there were a bunch of international like backpacker travelers. Met some people a bunch of people from Germany. So a guy from Canada was there. Then I ran into a couple other birders. Took a couple pictures back in Alajuela city in the Central Valley on my way back out. On my way to the airport. And leaving the country. Ready to go through security. So there we have it. What a fun trip. Highly recommended. I cannot wait to get back.
Yeah, I'm pretty jealous.
No.
Are there other questions for Cedar?
In 2009, we got to go with Bonneville Environmental Education Center, sponsored a tour down there.
Oh, nice.
It was great. Like, it brings back memories. It makes us want to review our trip now.
Yeah.
We were posing for a photograph of the group, and Patty Smith and Mary Ellen Copeland and Ed Anthes were on the trip as well. And we were all set, looking at the camera, and took a nice picture, and we're going to take another one, just make sure.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Patty Smith looked the other way, and she had caught sight of the 3-wattled bellbird. And so
nice.
of course, it just broke up the whole party at that point.
Totally. I will make a point to seek out that species. If I'm there, next time I'm there, when I have a car there, I'll go to one of the spots because I know they're increasingly hard to find those. And being there, I was at the wrong time of year for them to be or calling or whatever, making noise, so they're harder to find.
Sure.
But I think if you get there in the spring, March or April, I believe is maybe the better time to be there to find them, because then they're calling. So sounds like a fantastic experience. That's so cool.
I've been to Costa Rica a few times, and the first couple of times was with Vince when Chip Darmstadt was there.
Oh, nice.
And,
yes, Chip is
He
wonderful.
was a lot of fun to do it with because he spoke Spanish.
I can imagine. Yeah, Chip is great.
It was so much fun, and I just could go every year if I could. And
I hear you.
you just can't go anywhere in Costa Rica where you can't find birds.
Right.
It's everywhere.
I mean, the tropics are all like that. And Costa Rica is so easy to be. It's a really easy place to access the birds.
Are you still there or did I think I just froze up for a minute.
Your photo's not moving, or your video.
Whoops.
Oh, there you are.
Say that again. Say that again. The sound disappeared.
Okay. I was saying that Costa Rica seems to me like even compared to some of the other tropical countries where there are lots of birds, it's easier to get places. It's very friendly,
yes.
easy to travel country.
That's right.
So it's, as a birder, it's a great place to go.
Cedar, do you know, I guess I'm curious for the birds that don't migrate, there are no seasons. So do they breed all year? Or did you observe?
I think, well, some of the places don't have daylight seasons so much, but they do have changes in weather seasonally. So there might be a rainy season
Okay.
and a dry season. So they tend to, I'm not sure if they tend to all breed at the same time, more like our birds do, but they are certainly like groups of species. They will all breed during the end of the rainy season.
Okay,
Because
that
that's
makes
when all the
sense.
stuff, all the fruits are available, all the insects are out in full force.
Cool.
So
That makes sense.
yeah, I think the quetzals specifically will breed. They tend to breed in March and
Darn the
April.
sound.
Cool. Any other questions for Cedar or comments?
What did you just say about the quetzal? My sound disappeared again.
Yeah, I was thinking. I believe, if I remember correctly, people were saying they breed in like March, April is the time of year to catch them breeding, because that's when their primary food is fruiting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the tree that sounds like an almond tree.
Yeah, or like aguatillo.
Yeah.
It's-
The first time I saw them was also in the Talamanta Mountains.
It is from what I heard, it's the most reliable place to find them in the country, or potentially anywhere in the world.
Cedar, we didn't hear a bio on you. Can you tell us what you're doing now?
Yeah. What am I doing in life? In birding? I work in my day job at the violin shop in Amherst, fixing stringed instruments. That's my day to day. And then I play for most of you knew, but I'm a fiddler. I played violin, and there are just now the first couple gigs I've had in 2.5 years are starting to happen again. That's great.
Good.
And then birding. And that's part of one of the reasons I got back into doing more birding this past couple of years, because I didn't have any gigs playing, so I had all this free time. So
Yeah. Cedar, I hope that maybe you'll be able to make Birds and Brew on Thursday, and we can hear more about your trips.
Oh, is that this Thursday?
Right.
I could maybe try to make that. Yeah, Thursdays. I'm coming back from Amherst from work, so weeknights are often tough.
Yeah.
To get there, but I could probably get home early enough to do that. That sounds
Okay.
like fun.
So
Yeah.
at the marina.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Thank you for this.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was fun to remember myself and recount these things.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share the program with us this evening.
Totally.
That was
Thank you
a
so
pleasure.
much. Very
Thanks a lot.
enjoyable.
Great.
All right. Well.